the from. So here I've selected star from reserved seats, and you see we have the ID, booking ID and seat ID fields from the reserved seat table. And now I want to write a select statement which only grabs the booking ID and counts the number of seat ID and then group that by the booking ID. So basically we'll get the number of seats reserved for each booking ID. So let's write that now. So let's type select booking ID and then count on the seat ID from reserved seats, and then we need to group by the booking ID because we haven't got an aggregate function on the booking ID. And then we can run this statement. So you can see for every booking ID we have the number of seats that were reserved for that booking. So booking ID 1 reserved 3 seats, booking ID 2 reserved 2 seats, etc, etc. So what if we wanted to select the maximum value in this count seat ID column? So basically the maximum number of seats that were reserved by one booking. Well, we could put this select statement here in a query, and it could come after the from. So let's do that now to show you what I mean. So the first thing I want to do actually is I want to say count seat ID as number of seats, no underscore seats. So basically this is a column name alias. And then I want to put this select statement in brackets, so our inner query. And I actually want to type B here, and I'll explain that later. And then I want to write our outer query. So this is going to be our inner query. So now let's write our outer query. So I want to select the maximum value in this count seat ID row. So let's select max. Now I've put a column name alias on this count seat ID row, count seat ID column as number of seats. So now I can say max number of seats from this inner query. So I have select max number of seats from, which is our outer query, and then I have our inner query that's coming after the from. So our inner query is now select booking ID, count seat ID as number of seats from reserved seats, and we're grouping by the booking ID, and we've called this B. So now let's run this statement. And you can see it's returned max number of seats as 6, which was the maximum value in our count seat ID column. So let's see what exactly happened here. So normally when you select a column from, you're selecting from a table. So you can see here we're selecting star from a table, reserved seats. So when you use subqueries after the from, basically you're creating a table with the subquery. So this select booking ID count seat ID is actually creating a table. So it's creating a table with booking ID and number of seats and these values within the table. And this is known as a derived table. So you can see here we actually had to call our derived table B when we were running this whole subquery. So the inner query is creating a derived table which the outer query is then selecting from. So we're selecting max number of seats from the derived table created by our inner query. So the maximum value in this number of seats table will be 6, and we're selecting that in our outer query. And whenever you're creating a derived table in a subquery, you have to refer to that table with a name, so it can be any name. So here I just called it B, but I could have called it anything. So this table is being created and it's called a derived table. So it's not a permanent table in the database, it's just derived and used just for this subquery. But we have to give it a name, so we're calling it B in this case. And we can also select other columns from this. So let's say we wanted to select the average number of seats reserved per booking. We can type average number of seats, so average number of seats, comma max number of seats, and let's run this query, and it returns the average value for the number of seats column from our derived table, and it returns the maximum number of seats as well. So this is how we use subqueries after the from statement. Basically, the inner query creates a derived table which we then have to give a name, and the outer query then